So good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us this morning on this very, very important briefing with Professor Nils Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, who's written the book, The Trial of Julian Assange, which I hope I've sent to every single one of you with a PDF link. As usual, our format, which is being recorded, and we will send the recording round to every single one of you, is 1 hour in which Professor Melzer will start with a few remarks. I will kick off with the questions, and then I will invite every single one of you to, well, not one by one, if you have questions, to put your hand up. There's a little yellow hand at the bottom of your screen. I hope that you will manage to find it in the 2 years that we've done Zoom recordings and briefings. And if not, if all else fails, put your desire to ask a question in the chat and I should be able to see it. Okay, we'll kick off, first of all, with a very, very short introduction of Nils Melzer. He is a Swiss professor, author, and advocate in international law. Since 2016, he is the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture. He's a human rights chair at the Geneva Academy and professor of international law at Glasgow University. Very recently, he's been appointed Director of International Law, Policy and Humanitarian Diplomacy at the International Red Cross, a post which he will take up from July of this year. Congratulations on that. I've had to write all these things down because otherwise these titles are important. Prior to all of that, he was also a senior security policy advisor for the Swiss government. So I hope that you've all had a chance to have a look at the book, but we'll start with a few remarks from Nils and then we'll kick off. Nils, it's over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Yeah, wonderful. Okay, well, thank you very much and good morning, everybody. I very much appreciate having this opportunity to present my findings and especially the book that I've written on my findings in the Julian Assange case. I think for everyone to be up to speed about what the Special Rapporteur on Torture actually is, just a few words on that. I'm not an activist, I'm not a journalist, I'm not an NGO representative. I am an independent human rights expert who has been appointed by the Human Rights Council of the United Nations, so appointed by states essentially to monitor the compliance of UN member states with the provision of torture and ill treatment throughout the world, and to report any alleged violations to them, visit prisons and investigate cases. So I submit about between 100 and 400 cases, depending on the size of the cases, per year to governments. And I think it's important to understand that this is really an everyday work. Most of my interventions are not in the public sphere visible. Now, the Julian Assange case came to me in 2018 in December when he was still at the Ecuadorian embassy. And his lawyers asked for my intervention on his behalf because they argued that his living conditions at the Ecuadorian embassy had become inhumane. And I basically had this visceral reaction when I saw this email of, no, not this guy. And I think it's important because I have been affected, like I think many other people, by these narratives that have been spread about Julian Assange in the media for about a decade. The suspected rapist, the traitor, the hacker, and so on. And so I basically declined to get into the case. It's also important to know that I receive about 10 to 15 requests per day and can only deal with one. So it's quite normal for me to react quickly. But I noticed this distinct emotional reaction. And I only reconsidered the case about 3 months later, just before he was expelled from the embassy, when I received some medical opinions by independent medical experts that had visited Julian Assange in the embassy and actually came to the conclusion that indeed he had been subject to inhumane treatment. And this did not come from any, Assange activist. It really came from an independent medical doctor who had visited Guantanamo, was very respected in the US and so on, Dr. Sandra Crosby. And this kind of prompted me to say, well, I have to look into this case at least. And so I took my own medical experts with me, a forensic expert and a psychiatrist. Both of them had investigated cases of torture for 30 years. And I visited Julian Assange when he was in Belmarsh prison, and on the 9th of May 2019, just a few weeks after his arrest. I didn't expect to find torture. I thought I'd find some medical conditions, make some recommendations, fly back, and he's in British hands now, so everything will be fine. He'll get a fair trial, and I don't have to worry about this anymore. What we did find really shocked me. As soon as I started scratching the surface of this case, I saw that there were massive due process violations, and not in some kind of usual suspect state where you would expect grave violations of human rights, but in kind of the classic rule of law states in Western Europe of Sweden and Britain. And I saw that none of these violations have been properly addressed, and that all of those accusations that have been made against Julian Assange, I didn't find any consolidated evidence that would prove that. Quite to the contrary, I found actually that the facts had been distorted deliberately in the narratives that have been spread about him. And so the deeper I got into this case, the more dirt came to the surface, but it was not on the side of Julian Assange, as everyone would have expected from the narratives that have been spread, but it was on the side of the government. And so I confronted the governments with those findings and asked them to provide counter evidence or explanations on how this was lawful, what they were doing in the case of Julian Assange. And what really shocked me is that all four involved states, the US, Britain, Sweden, and Ecuador, refused to engage in a constructive dialogue with me. And this, again, on the background that I'm mandated by those states to actually engage in dialogues with them. And they're called on by the UN to cooperate fully with my mandate. And so that really triggered a deeper investigation into this case. And what I found really was a concerted effort in trying to set an example on Julian Assange to deter other journalists, people like yourselves, to follow his example. So you should not do that. You should not. If I gave you a USB stick today with, say, the collateral murder video #2, which proved war crimes at the time in Iraq, or the diplomatic cables, the next 250,000 diplomatic cables, if I gave you a USB stick like this, I don't have one, just so you know, but if I had one and I gave it to you, would you publish it? I think it's a fair argument to say that you would be very, very hesitant to do that because of what is being done to Julian Assange. And I will not be long here. I could go obviously in lots of details, which is why I've written a book about it. I felt that I was unable, through diplomatic channels that were at my disposal, or by alerting the General Assembly in New York or alerting the Human Rights Council in Geneva, I was unable to receive any redress in this case, as I was mandated to do. And I felt that this pointed to a systemic failure of human rights mechanisms whenever states claim perceived essential security interests or something like this, and they kind of cover their interests and their business with a veil of secrecy. And I felt that this was fundamentally threatening not only to the human rights of Julian Assange, but to the human rights of everybody else and to the future of press freedom. Because if the United States succeeds in prosecuting Julian Assange for, and we look at the indictment, we see essentially they're accusing him of receiving and publishing secret information of national security relevance. Now, he's not an American, he had no ties to the US, he had no obligations to the US, he was a foreign journalist who published evidence for war crimes and grave human rights violations, which are clearly in the public interest. If the US succeeds in prosecuting this man and sending him to a supermax prison for the rest of his life, this will have an enormous chilling effect on free press, on investigative national security journalism, and which is absolutely essential to maintain that freedom of press in the democratic system, because that's the only way in a complex society for people to know what their governments are doing with the power that they're being given by the people and the money they're being given by the people. So I felt that this case really is not about the Assange case is not simply about Assange. It's about all of us. It's about the integrity of our modern democracies and rule of law systems and the future really of the press freedom. And that's why I decided to write this book, to provide the evidence that I had collected during my investigation, so people can see and can judge for themselves, and judge for themselves what the implications are of this case. So as I say in the book, I didn't write this book as a lawyer or advocate for Assange as much as an advocate for the rule of law, press freedom, and human rights. And I'd be happy to, engage with you in a discussion, and rather than now having a monologue, and answer perhaps your questions with regard to that book.
Thank you very much, Nils. I will kick off, and please start putting your hands up, or, as we discussed before, if you have questions. So first of all, I wanted to ask you, you've stuck out your neck very much on this, because Assange is a very controversial figure, and many people, just like you reacted at the beginning, don't really want anything to do with him because he's been completely discredited in the public arena. However, you've gone and written a book as well on it, and it shows great courage, and it shows that you've gone through a journey. No. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah. I can hear you now.
Yeah. Okay. Basically, to resume what I just said, you've stuck out your neck. He's a very controversial figure. You've put your credibility on the line for this, and you've shown that you've gone through a journey. At the beginning of the book, you say this is an alarm call. At the end of the book, this is a fire alarm. So the call gets louder and louder as you write the book. Has it had any effect whatsoever so far?
Well, I think so, yes. I think already before the book came out, I think my various public statements, and obviously I'm not alone in this, there are other important influential figures who have raised their voice since then. But I think it has kind of shaken the boat or rocked the boat sufficiently that, especially in the non-Anglo-Saxon press, I think more attention is being given to this case in the German-speaking area, for example, or in Italy and so on. It also starts in the Anglo-Saxon press, but it's much more muted, I feel. That was really alarming to me. I was convinced in the beginning, well, if governments don't respond to me, if I provide the evidence to the press, they will jump on it because it's a scandal. And someone like BBC will make a scandal out of this. No, they didn't. They took the interview offline, that they had with me, and so there's no trace of it back. And to be fair, there were some radio interviews with the BBC, but so I don't want to point at them only, but I want just to say that even the mainstream press, and I don't even suggest any bad intentions, has been so affected by those narratives. This man has become so untouchable because of the narrative that has been created about him. But there is no evidence for that, that they're not able to play their role as the fourth estate and inform the public about the due process violations that are being at the game that's being played here behind the curtains. And I think that's really what I found is extremely concerning. I do feel that there is an opening, especially now that we see that the case is progressing and his potential extradition to the US becomes a more realistic kind of a scenario, that even the press in the US starts to become worried what the implications are for them if the government really goes through with this. I also have to say, until President Biden took over, everybody somehow was of the impression, well, this is a Trump thing, and it will not outlast his presidency. But now President Biden has taken over, and he was part of the Obama administration, and the Obama administration decided not to prosecute Assange at the time. At least they claimed that this was their position. And now it seems that Biden really wants to push through with this, which I think is extremely concerning as a development. What does this mean in a country where the First Amendment of the Constitution is so important? It's really a country that holds up press freedom. If they create that precedent, what's going to be the result in the UK that doesn't have that, or in other countries? Yeah.
Something that comes out very clearly from your book is the subservience of the UK government to the US, basically waiting for the new president to settle in, to figure out what he wished to do on the Assange case. Sweden seems also subservient. Ecuador, since the government changed in 2017, also changed its tune. Did you expect any of that in a country, and I'd like to come back to the UK, which makes so much out of the rule of law? And can you just explain a little bit more the link between the decision to go with Brexit and the resulting increased subservience to the US, quoting that special relationship?
Well, I'm not a specialist on Brexit. I mean, that was just my interpretation that I felt, well, if the UK, once they leave the EU, clearly their strongest, political and economic partner will be the US, or that relationship will become much more, strong and important for the UK. Well, it will be much more difficult for the UK to go its own way, basically, and perhaps refuse to cooperate with the US in certain aspects. But I think this is not just speculation. And I think I do quote that in the book. It's the diary of former Alan Duncan, former British minister, who was responsible for that arrest operation of Assange. And he basically says in his own, diary that the UK is subservient to the US. Everything that is being done in foreign policy in the UK is subservient to US policy. So I'm basically quoting government or former government representatives. But I also think what's important, this is not just about the US, because the UK and Sweden and Germany and Australia and other countries, they're running the political game in the same way. They're cooperating very closely behind the curtains with the US government, and the secret services and intelligence services are in very, very close cooperation with each other. We know that from the diplomatic cables, for example, but not only, also from the Snowden leaks and the NSA stories and so on. So that cooperation is extremely close. And so those authorities of those other countries, they're not interested in having their dirty secrets, published by an actor like WikiLeaks either. So I don't think that this is just US pressure on those states. I think those states are quite voluntarily cooperating with the US because they agree that they don't want this type of uncontrolled public transparency. Now, I even think, as a former security policy advisor to my own government, governments have legitimate interests in confidentiality. But I do distinguish, and I think it's important in the book to distinguish confidentiality from secrecy. Confidentiality means you have a protected space to negotiate where the public does not have immediate access. But there is an independent judicial oversight that it's possible of what's going on there. If there's any misconduct by state officials, this is not withdrawn from legal oversight. If you have secrecy, and then you protect that secrecy with a Espionage Act, Official Secrets Act, where it becomes punishable to publish under any circumstances something that the government has classified. Well, essentially what you're doing, that you're giving a potential criminal the right to classify any evidence against it. And that's not good for the rule of law. I think it's a no-brainer that this should not happen.
I want to talk a little bit, just a couple more questions. I see you, Alex, with your hand up. So just give me a couple more questions, because I wanted to, you refer to your role in the book at one point as the sort of UN as a toothless tiger in your role, even though you say that it's not the case. But what comes through is that even if you are the UN Special Rapporteur on torture, in particular, when you ask anything of the British authorities, you are treated very much, can I say, with disdain. They make you wait. They don't answer your emails or your letters, your official letters. They don't give you what you ask. They take no notice. So what is the role of the UN Special Rapporteur on torture if you have absolutely no executive power to do anything?
Well, I think it just reflects the reality of what the United Nations is. It's a very important organization. I think it's the best thing we have, but unfortunately it's not perfect at all. It reflects that kind of mixed nature of being an international organization, but it's very much dominated by the five, P5 countries and their allies. And so the powerful countries really dominate that organization. And that's clearly reflected in the Charter of the UN. It's not a secret. It's not a rule of law organization. Rule of law plays as long as power politics deems it to its advantage. As soon as power politics goes in a different direction, the rule of law is neutralized. That's just the way, that's the reality we live in today. And I think it's a reality we have to outgrow fast if we want to survive as a human species, given the challenges we have today. That are all global, and the pandemic is just one of them, right? I mean, global warming and so on, financial stability, everything. So unfortunately, I think that's just a reality we live in, that the UN is, and human rights experts are instrumentalized very often, that states are happy for us to intervene with the bad states, but not who they consider to be the bad states. And those obviously would consider the other way around. They would use us to intervene against other states. But it's very rare that a state authority is prepared to actually genuinely reform its own behavior in order to improve its human rights record. And that's something we're all confronted with all the time, and with all states, without any exception, unfortunately. Yeah.
And my last one, and then I'll give over to a few colleagues. In 20 years of visiting torture victims and working on torture, you decided to act with a book on this particular case, and you called what is happening to Assange now as tantamount to psychological torture. Does it really compare with the torture that you've seen around the world in your job? And why did you decide to become public on this particular case and not on cases that might look worse?
Yeah, well, obviously, you should never compare cases of torture. Every case of torture is horrible, and psychological torture is not torture light. It just doesn't leave visible traces as much as physical torture does, but it destroys the identity of the person much more effectively sometimes than physical torture. So, but you're right. I mean, in some contexts, the torture that is happening is much more atrocious on the individual victim. But what I found so troubling in this case is the systemic failure. So the inability or unwillingness of modern democracies, when provided clear evidence for government misconduct, to actually correct that the checks and balances they're just not working at all in this case. And, it's not just about Julian Assange as a person, but it's also look at what he has revealed. These are some of the most grave crimes. There we're looking at the type of torture you just referred to in Iraqi prisons, and the murder of civilians. And I mean, by the thousands, we have now evidence for these crimes. No one has ever been prosecuted for any of those crimes, even with video evidence. And that really is shocking, where you can see that war crimes are not being prosecuted, but those who expose them are being prosecuted and actually subjected even to ill treatment, arbitrary detention, and what could amount even to psychological torture. I think that displays a systemic problem of enormous proportions. And I took this case only to illustrate that, because obviously it's not the only case. Other whistleblowers or other journalists rather, but also whistleblowers are being persecuted. Manning, Snowden, Daniel Hale, I think, the drone program and so on. But none of these crimes are being prosecuted. And that really, none of the torture cases in Guantanamo, nobody has been prosecuted. When the German prosecutor wanted to prosecute CIA agents for the torture of a German citizen and wanted to extradite them, the German government refused to ask for the extradition because they cooperate so closely with the US government. And so what we see is that the essential checks and balances of the democratic states are being neutralized because of the collusion between those secret services. And that, I'm not claiming secret services are bad. We need them for our security, but they, when you have a watchdog who is able to bite, you need to have them on a leash. And the leash is the rule of law and judicial oversight. And that needs to work. Otherwise, you will lose control. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's move on to questions. Alexander Kabarov, you're the first one. Please unmute yourself. Just remind us who you work with and go with your question.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Nils. My name is Alexander. I'm working for TV channel Russia 1. And the question is, given your experience with this case, and do you think that Julian finally will lose it and be extradited to the United States, or he has some chances to stay or maybe go free from the prison? What's your opinion?
Well, unfortunately, if I look at the track record of the UK judiciary in this case, I'm not optimistic. We now have the Supreme Court that might still has to decide whether they will accept the appeal by Julian Assange, or even look at it. And there might be some other legal remedies still in the UK, but I'm not very optimistic about that, given the history it has in this case in the UK. But we still also have the possibility, obviously, of the European Court for Human Rights in Strasbourg finally, as a final, instance, ruling over the case. And there I see, big chances that they might refuse the extradition. I hope so, at least, that they will have the integrity to apply the law as it should be, because there really is legal. And I can say this as an expert in international law. Legally speaking, there is no way this extradition could ever lawfully go forward, because it is about espionage, which is the quintessential example of a political offense, and the US-UK treaty explicitly prohibits extraditions for political offenses. And this has been so distorted by the UK judge in the first instance that this is really grotesque. So this really is already, then we have all those massive due process violations, the illegal surveillance in the embassy, the mistreatment of Julian Assange, the unlawful seizure of his belongings, all of this, and that has been given into the US, has given the US such an unfair advantage in this proceeding already for formalistic reasons. He could never be extradited. And then we still have not discussed press freedom and all of these things. So I'm hopeful that if he can somehow sustain his mental health for that period, that the European Court of Human Rights might refuse that. Now the question is whether the UK will respect that ruling. That is the other question.
Thank you, Alex. You're done. Yeah. Nils, can I ask you, in your book, you write this, the trial of Julian Assange may well prove to be the biggest judicial scandal of our times. And yet it doesn't get covered in the mainstream media, especially in this country. Why do you think that is? That's
precisely part of the scandal. I apologize if I have to raise the example of the BBC again, but I just felt that this was such an influential medium that I wanted to engage them in this case. And they did interview me when I made my first press statement, BBC World did, on a live Skype interview for 5 minutes. And the next hour it was gone. And so I contacted them and said, look, I agree that what I'm saying is I wouldn't have believed that a few months ago. So what I'm claiming is so outrageous that either I'm wrong and then I have to resign, or I'm right, but then someone else has to resign. So, but there is no way someone like the BBC, an actor like the BBC, can be indifferent about this. So invite me, have a hard talk with me, ask all the difficult questions, prove me wrong, and I'll resign. Or, I'll prove you that I'm right, but then you have to confront your government, because there is just no way that this is not important. But they really responded to me that right now this is not newsworthy. And so, this attitude to me reflects an unwillingness to actually look at the elephant in the room. Yes, they're present. Yes, they're reporting on the court hearings, but they're just saying the judge said this and Assange's team said that. But they're not really looking at what's happening here. What is this really about? And it's not just about press freedom. It's really that the UK courts are systematically violating this person's right. And as a professor at the UK university, I'm shocked to see that this is possible and that the public doesn't react and the media doesn't inform the public about this very shocking aspect, that we have a man locked up in a solitary confinement in a high security prison who's not violent, who's not serving a sentence. I mean, he should be free, perhaps with, house arrest, so he doesn't, again, ask for asylum in some embassy or something like this. I get that point formally, but if you want to conduct that proceeding, but Augusto Pinochet was in house arrest for 1.5 years when he was in extradition detention. And he was free to receive as many visitors as he wanted and to have access to the public. And that's precisely, it seems to me, what the government wants to prevent, because there is no legal basis for keeping Julian Assange in a high security prison. So why are they doing this? And it really destroys his health and also prevents him from preparing his a case in his defense properly. I've experienced it when I went through the security checks of Belmarsh. It's atrocious to go through those checks. It's a high security prison, it's normal. But it also means that he doesn't have enough access to his lawyers. He doesn't have enough access to, support that he needs to prepare this trial, where on the other side is the most powerful country in the world with an army of lawyers. So how is that possible? But there is simply no engagement. I don't receive any responses by the UK government on my official letters, as a UN expert. And that, I think, is just, profoundly shocking. Yeah.
Sabrina, I can see you with your hand up. Please unmute yourself and go with your question. Sabrina, you're muted still.
Yeah, I'm Sabrina Provenzani from Il Fatto Quotidiano. With my colleague Stefano Maurizio as well, we've been covering constantly and regularly what happened in a critical way. And as you, I've been struck by the lack of engagement from British media. And it's a difficult question, but I wonder whether you have ever found evidence of some direct or indirect pressure from the government on newsrooms in the UK.
No, I don't have any evidence. It's really pure speculation. And the press really needs to be concerned. I don't know whether the issue is that a deal has been struck somehow. We leave you alone if you give us Assange or something. I can't in my position speculate about this. But the silence is deafening. The silence, yes, it's true. Even some of the big media houses have started speaking about press freedom and these types of things. But then we see that as a response, the US government has then revised this indictment and started focusing more on alleged computer offenses. But because they didn't have any evidence for it, then they fabricated it, and they basically bribed a criminal, this Icelandic witness, Siggy, into giving false evidence against Julian Assange. And so, these types of things are extremely worrying.
Nils, you talk about, Assange, but in your book, you're very careful not to describe the man and maybe your relationship with him and whether you like him or not. And I understand that is to keep as far away from as possible from any kind of accusation of being a friend or an activist. But what is your relationship with him? What is he like? And why is he so disliked by people who've worked with him? Like, The Guardian, Channel 4, they've all dropped him like a hot potato. So what is it about him?
Well, I think many of you know him better than I do. I've spent 4 hours with him, and of which, about half was just medical examinations where I wasn't even present. But and I have a very kind of technical, professional relation. I have never talked to him again after that. But what I saw is, apart from kind of the symptoms that would be quite typical for isolation prisoners, you know, the kind of confusion they have, the interchangeable depression and anxieties and so on, I noticed something that I didn't understand at the time. That was very focused on his own thoughts. I had to go through a list of questions, you know, my standard list of initial questions, you know, how many hours a day can you leave the cell, and, you know, how many times to get food, and, you know, these kind of normal everyday questions. And he wasn't able to just respond to them and get you through that list in the 5 or 10 minutes, but he would then expand into discussions about the philosophical meaning of the human rights mechanisms and so on. And it was very intelligent and very to the point, but not to the point what I was trying to do myself. So what I noticed is that he didn't have the sensitivity to realize what I wanted to achieve. But as soon as I verbalized it, he immediately understood and helped me, you know, to comply with it. But now I have an explanation, obviously, because the medical doctors and the lawyers have disclosed his diagnosis of Asperger's, which is a slight form of autism, which really is quite typical for these people, that they don't have the kind of social sensitivity of you know, taking unspoken cues. If you don't verbalize what you want, they don't realize what your needs are, and they just go with their own thoughts. And I think that is something that certainly would have contributed to people thinking that he is self-centered and narcissistic, but actually he just has a slight form of autism. But I also did realize in that short time that we had together that whenever I verbalized what I wanted and what I needed from him, he was very keen to provide that. So I would just ask people who had uncomfortable experiences with him, you know, from journalists, from those women in Sweden, and you know, and I don't know what happened between all of those people, but just to look back at their experience and think, how would I analyze this had I known at the time that he actually has a slight form of autism? Because I think that really is quite typical for them. Very intelligent, very you know, friendly, but you know, this kind of closeness in himself.
Lourdes, I can see your hand up. Please go for it.
Thank you. It's Lourdes Gomez, a Spanish journalist at the moment with the Spanish service of Sputnik. You mentioned in the book that when you were writing the first report, you had the hope and the expectation that the process could be stopped. But at that time, the US had already asked for extradition. It was already the petition because you visit him 1 month after. And so within the British government, even if they had answered you officially, would have said that they couldn't, they wouldn't never intervene in a judicial process. Or do you think it's also this a question of the same way that the judges are always saying, no, we cannot improve the situation in the prison because that's the prison officers. Is that a question of each other just blaming the other ones, or just, you know, nobody able to intervene?
Of course. I mean, look, this is not genuine. It's not good faith. You know, you know, when the judge says, well, I can't influence the prison conditions, and the prison says, well, we can't, you know, influence it either because it's actually the judge who has to do it. They're just playing ping pong, you know. But it's a standard response I get from democratic states when they don't want to do anything about the case I'm raising, not just in this case. It's a fairly standard response that the government says, yes, you have intervened with the government, but this is now pending with the courts. And we are a democracy, got rule of law, separation of powers, so we can't interfere with the ongoing court proceeding. But that's not genuine, because I'm mandated to intervene with states and all of their authorities, including courts and parliaments. You know, if it's about a legislative project, I can intervene with the parliament. If it's about a pending court case, I can actually intervene with the court. But I have to do it through the Minister of Foreign Affairs. That's my interlocutor by protocol. But then the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has to transmit my request to the courts so they can respond to me. But instead of doing that, they say, oh, we're the government, you know, we can't deal with this. The foreign minister never tortures anybody. It's always the police or the military or, you know, the judicial police. So clearly, the person I intervene with and their authority always has to transmit it to a different authority. That's how it should work. And it's really a bad faith, kind of justification or evasion of responsibility to say, oh, we're not in charge or something like that. And then also we should have to be quite clear and take a different case that is in some respects at least comparable, of Alexei Navalny. There you can see that governments have no problem whatsoever, being very vocal about it in parliament and calling for sanctions and receiving him for medical treatment and doing everything in order to protect his human rights. And I have intervened on his behalf as well. And I agree, that his rights should be protected. And I commend when foreign governments are vocal about it, but then they also have to be just as vocal about the case of Julian Assange. And so there we see the hypocrisy of official policy, where in the same session, for example, in the German parliament in October 2020, I think it was, the foreign minister, was very vocal about the case of Navalny, but when asked in the same session about the case of Assange, said that he had no doubt that he was being treated according to the law, although I had just met with his staff earlier and briefed them on the grave violations of Assange's rights. So I think that's just a reality of politics, unfortunately.
Just one more. So far, nobody in the British government has ever met you and have a conversation, a dialogue, or anything.
Well, when I visited the prison, on the next day, I had meetings with British authorities. But again, whenever I visit a country, my interlocutor, at least for a courtesy meeting, is the foreign minister or the minister of justice, or who's responsible for the prison system. That might be a short meeting, and then it's delegated down. But that's the political level where we can, because this is a political case, and you need to find a political solution for it. But they have delegated all those meetings downwards to the administrative level. So I met all kinds of directors of administrative services, but they cannot take any decisions in this case. They can only explain the system to me. And that was precisely the purpose. You see, when I'm given interlocutors like this, it is a message: we're not going to change anything. We'll inform you about our system, but we will not change anything because the people you talk to cannot change anything. And so that's the only people I met. And when I wrote to the foreign minister, I didn't get a response. I got a response 5 months later that they rejected all my allegations and that Julian Assange was treated in accordance with the rule of law on less than 1 page. And that was basically the end of it. I never received another response. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I meant at the ministerial level, whether they've never offered you a chance to talk.
No, none of those 4 states. None of those 4 states. Yeah.
Thank you.
And a follow-up on this is within the UN, you can't go and tell anyone from the UN to make this move in another way, to try to dislodge this kind of attitude. Can't you go and say, I'm not being treated like a UN rapporteur, I'm not able to do my job, something has to happen?
I did. I informed the Human Rights Council in my yearly meeting, where my reporting session. Well, all of those states were present, including observer states. I informed even the General Assembly in New York in their third committee. I did press conferences about it, but there was no reaction, basically. And I even tried to meet with the High Commissioner for Human Rights on this. On several occasions, I asked in writing for a meeting, and she delegated it to a level where, again, it's not helpful. So basically, I was unable to even meet with the High Commissioner. And now I just want to tell people, it's absolutely standard for someone like me to meet with the High Commissioner or to meet with the minister. I mean, it's not something exceptional. It's rather exceptional that they all refused. It was this wall of silence where this was just an untouchable case. And that's why I felt there cannot be an untouchable case. If Assange is a serious criminal, yes, he should be tried and convicted. But what is he being accused of exactly? Even the Swedish allegations, which were the most grave allegations really in the history of this case, they were dropped by the Swedish authorities before they expired, 1.5 years before they expired, and at a time when Julian Assange was available to them because he was in British prison. He could have been easily questioned and prosecuted by the Swedish, but that's when they had to bring the evidence, because they had to decide about indicting him or not. And that's why they had to admit at the time we actually never had enough evidence to even press charges against him. So after 9 years. And so even that was dropped. So we have to presume he's innocent by law. That's just the principle that we have. And so what else? He's not a traitor. He's not a US citizen. He had no obligations. So what? He published true information about serious crimes by government officials that have not been prosecuted. So where's the crime? And even that so-called hacking charge, so all those hacking accusations, there is no evidence whatsoever that anybody ever hacked or stole information at WikiLeaks. No, they created a platform where you can submit information. They received it, but they didn't hack it, they didn't steal it. And so what's the crime? Why is he already for more than a decade in one form of detention or another and being threatened with a life in solitary confinement? And I think that really is very, very worrying. And to have that wall of silence in a case like this, where even big human rights organizations had big hesitations getting engaged with this case.
But yet WikiLeaks continues to exist. We have had multiple briefings with Christian Kramston and his staff in a way, or his, the people who work with him. The work of WikiLeaks continues. So why wasn't WikiLeaks targeted as well? Or do you think the way that it's operating now is completely different to when Assange was there because they've had to self-censor?
I don't think I'm competent to answer that question because I'm not a specialist in WikiLeaks. I don't, I think it's a few years back that they have come out with some big publications. What certainly has not materialized is kind of a continuation of 2010, where we had massive leaks and, with everything got completely out of control for the US government. And if we put ourselves in the shoes of the states, not only the United States, but also their allies in 2010, they did not know what 2011, 12, and 13 would look like. So I think they were really, they didn't understand, they couldn't predict that. So they intervened massively at the time to stop what they feared, which would have been, I presume it was the proliferation of the idea of WikiLeaks, which is easy to replicate really, with the internet today. And if you have, a few years later, 10,000 WikiLeaks all over the world, then it will be impossible for governments to continue with this kind of policy of secrecy and impunity for their own crimes. And so I think that really, that was stopped in one way or another, but I can't tell you exactly, how that happened. Certainly what happened to Julian Assange clearly contributed to intimidating people, from pursuing this further.
I see that Latika Book has a question. Latika, can you unmute yourself, please, and ask your question?
Thanks. Sorry, my computer's playing havoc with me today. Thank you very much for the time. Can I just ask what your interactions with the Australian government have been? Because there has been some concern expressed quite recently with the Deputy Prime Minister saying he's very concerned about an Australian citizen being prosecuted in another country. So you were talking about you not being, hitting brick walls in the UK, hitting brick walls in the US. What specifically have you attempted with the Australian government and what's the reaction been? Yeah. Could you just clarify something you were saying then about the hacking? Because that's really the heart of these charges. Do you believe that there is no case whatsoever relating to the hacking pertaining to Assange, and that he should be let go? Is that what you're saying? Yeah,
so there's two questions in this. So the first one on Australia, I have a very precise mandate, which is about the prohibition of torture and ill treatment. So I can't intervene on all human rights aspects with governments. And so I had to see which states I felt had contributed actively to the ill treatment of Julian Assange in one way or another. And Australia just didn't, make that list, so to speak. So I didn't intervene with Australia because I didn't have any basis to assume, or any evidence at least, that they had actively contributed to the ill treatment of Julian Assange. So that was the reason why I didn't actively intervene with them. I have then been in contact with some members of parliament who themselves reached out to me and wanted to be briefed about the case. But there was no direct contact with the government for that reason, because they're simply not, they didn't ask for it, and I didn't have a reason to proactively speak with them because of that. The hacking issue, well, what we have seen is that much of the evidence that has been or alleged evidence of hacking or encouragement of hacking and so on, it has been provided in the US indictment, the superseding indictment of 2020, has been based on fabricated evidence. Excuse me. Evidence that has been fabricated by this Siki character that I mentioned before, this Icelandic witness, who's a notorious criminal, who has several convictions for child molestation and also financial offenses and so on. And he actually basically went public saying that he had been offered a non-prosecution agreement by the US for giving, by the FBI in return for giving this kind of false evidence, and he retracted it. So what remains really is that first indictment point where Julian Assange is, and I'm not a technical expert, but as far as I understand, he's being accused of having helped his source in the US forces, Chelsea Manning, or having attempted to help her to decode a so-called password hash, which would have allowed her to access the computer system where the sensitive information was stored with a different identity than her own. She already had full top secret clearance. So it was not about getting access to the information, but it was about her logging in with a different identity. And so basically it was about covering her tracks in the system, as I understand. So this really would have been an activity not of hacking or stealing information, but of source protection, which is what my understanding again is that investigative journalists do that all the time, that they support their sources in concealing their identity. But again, this is just an accusation that has not even been proven. So it's an accusation of attempted source protection, which turned out not to work because they couldn't decode that password hash. So it didn't have any effect in the real world. It was an attempt, it was an unsuccessful attempt, and not one at hacking, but at source protection within a computer system. Now, if there is anything unlawful about this, it certainly is not a serious crime. It's something that is being attempted, literally millions of times every day around the world, and nobody ever prosecutes it unless it causes damage, simply because. So what I want to put out there is I'm not saying Julian Assange is necessarily innocent of everything, but I'm saying there is no serious crime that he's being accused of. Even that accusation that he endangered US forces or their collaborators with these publications is very problematic, because the US has been asked twice in the US court in the Manning trial and in the Assange trial in the UK to provide evidence of people that have been actually endangered by those publications, and they have not been able to raise a single case. They have actually admitted that they don't have a specific case that they could raise after 10 years later. So why would that be I can see that potentially publications can endanger people, but if they didn't, why would you prosecute and spend tens of millions to corner a man for so long, to prosecute him for something that could have perhaps threatened someone? And on top of it, there is, and I'm ending on that, but it's important to know that those unredacted publications there is a serious twist in that evidence as well. It was not WikiLeaks who was the first to publish those, but apparently, according to the evidence presented in court and proven by an IT expert who was asked to analyze those processes for the court, that it was 2 Guardian journalists who published a password to an unredacted file that was stored on the internet that nobody could access without that password. They published it in their book about the WikiLeaks and made it accessible to the public. And Julian Assange actually even warned the US of this and said that it was now out of his control. He contacted them. There's an audio file where he speaks to the State Department, I believe it was, offering to work with them to do damage control. And it was not the Guardian doing that. And so I think it's really important that we question the narratives and look at the evidence. And they really, to me, I've not found any evidence for anything that would justify his prosecution. That's just as much as I can say.
Thank you. Simone Rosenblatt, please remind us who you work with and go with your question and mute yourself first.
Hello, I'm Simone from ARD German Radio. My question is about recent reports from Yahoo News that the CIA plotted to kidnap or kill Julian Assange. Do you think these accusations are credible?
Yeah, well, again, it's difficult for me to, because I had not had access to the direct sources of these allegations. So it's difficult for me to make a definite statement. But yes, I believe it's credible. As far as I know, the allegations are that assassination has been considered, but then was not pursued as being judged too risky. But that his kidnapping from the embassy and potential rendition was actually considered by the Trump administration. I think, especially I think it was Pompeo at the time, who was at the head of the CIA, and that was a reaction to the Vault 7 leaks in 2017 that concerned the CIA. I don't think that's unrealistic, especially because we have a parallel criminal trial occurring in Spain against the security company who was tasked to guard the Ecuadorian embassies, who worked for the Ecuadorian authorities. But in the back of those authorities also worked for the CIA, basically provided the CIA with a direct video feed, apparently, of video surveillance. And there were 2 former employees who anonymously testified in court, employees of that security company, who said that apparently even there were plans to poison or abduct Julian Assange. So we have 2 different sources now that are consistent. So in a sense, I think there is some credibility in that, but clearly it has to be investigated more deeply.
We've got a couple of minutes left, so I wanted to wrap up, Nils, by asking you if you think that your book is basically a call to arms, a way of saying, wake up, do something about it. And also, I'm kind of drawing in Dawn Manner's thing on the chat as well. What is it that you want people to do? What can grassroots organizations do? What can the international press do, apart from the obvious? What is it that you're hoping that will come out from this book's publication?
I want to kind of I want to expose the facts of this case, and also to invite people who might be, having the same kind of prejudice against Assange that I had myself, which prompted me not to take the case in the beginning. Just to read that book and join me on that journey that I went through to uncover all those false narratives, and to think that this is not, you're not reading this because you want necessarily to help Assange. You might, but this is not the primary point. Is that you should look at this as evidence for how the system's working, the system that we are part of and that governs us. And it's not about finding, the bad guy. It's really a fault in the system. that allows these types of things to happen. And I think that's of extreme societal importance, that we cannot have, legitimate dissent and exposure of serious government crimes resulting in impunity for officials and life sentences for witnesses and whistleblowers and journalists. This is extremely dangerous. I think people should speak out. We should look in the mirror and see, well, what is our responsibility? How can we contribute to this? And I just want to say, if the main media organizations joined forces, I believe this case would be over within 10 days. If they really joined forces and exposed the truth about this case, we could put an end to this immediately. It has happened even in a country like Russia. I think it was a person called Golunov, who was a dissident who was arrested based on some kind of framed for, I think, some drug offenses. And then the main 3 newspapers in Russia joined forces, and on their headlines for, I think, several days said, like, we are Golunov, and showed solidarity, and the case collapsed immediately. I believe something similar could happen here, and would have to happen here. And it just shows the power of the media and the importance to realize that the media is not here to entertain us. It's here to empower us. It's the fourth estate for a reason. And it's so important that they keep, fulfilling that societal role, and in this case and in many others in the future.
Thank you very much. If there are no other questions, we finish almost on the dot at 12. Nils, thank you so much for being with us today and for the book. I think your message is very clear. I will send round the recording of this to everybody who is on the call, so don't worry if you haven't taken all your notes at the same time as you were listening. And thank you again for being with us. Goodbye.
Thank you, Deborah, for hosting me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.